Welcome back to The Explainer. I am so thrilled you're joining me today because we are tackling an absolute cornerstone of macroeconomics, the IS curve. If you've ever stared at economic models and felt, a bit overwhelmed by the alphabet soup of variables and intersecting lines, please don't sweat it. Today, we're clearing all of that up. We're going to focus purely on the mechanics of the IS curve itself, nothing more, nothing less. We'll break down exactly how it's built and how it moves, step by logical step. To make this really stick, we'll use a deconstruction approach. We'll start with a quick introduction to the IS curve, move into its three building blocks, look at moving along the curve, explore the ripple effect, and finally, wrap things up with shifting the entire curve. Okay, let's dive right into Section 1, Introduction to the IS curve, the foundation. Because to understand how a machine works, you obviously first need to know what it actually does. At its core, the IS curve represents the aggregate demand for output in a closed economy. Now, by closed economy, we just mean we're completely ignoring international trade for a minute. No exports, no imports. We're looking strictly at the total picture of the domestic market's output. Think of the IS curve as giving us a snapshot of the total demand for goods and services across different interest rates. All right, let's pop the hood for Section 2, the three building blocks deconstructing the formula. We're going to break down the aggregate demand formula. That's Y equals C plus G plus I. Let's walk through these three components logically because it's pretty intuitive once you see it. First up, C stands for private consumption. This is basically everyday spending by you and me. It's heavily driven by our disposable income, which we represent as Y, total output or income, minus T for taxes. Makes sense, right? Next, we have G for government spending. In this specific model, we treat government spending as a fixed variable. It doesn't change based on output. And similarly, taxes, or T, are also fixed here, acting essentially like a flat poll tax. Finally, we get to I for investments. This is the really fluid part of our equation. Investments act as a negative function of the interest rate, which we call R. Simply put, when the interest rate is high, borrowing money is expensive, so investments naturally drop. Let's move on to Section 3, moving along the curve, the internal mechanics. This is where things get really dynamic. We need to see what happens inside the economy when that fluid variable, the interest rate, starts to shift. Imagine we start out at point A, where the interest rate is high. Because borrowing is so pricey, investments are low, and as a result, our total output is also pretty low. But watch this logical domino effect. Step 1, the interest rate drops. So we move down the curve toward point B. Step 2, suddenly borrowing money is a whole lot cheaper, which means investments across the economy start to rise. And step 3, this surge in investment directly causes our total output, Y, to increase. So as we slide right down along the IS curve from point A to point B, aggregate demand is growing for the simple reason that lower interest rates are fueling higher investments. But the story actually doesn't end there. Let's look at Section 4, the ripple effect, how growth feeds itself. There's a fascinating secondary effect happening behind the scenes here that is absolutely crucial. What's really interesting is how that initial spark creates a ripple effect throughout the whole economy. Remember how output grew because of those higher investments? Well, when total output grows, it means the overall income in the economy is growing too. Since we know our taxes are fixed, a higher total income means that disposable income, that Y minus T, is also growing. And what do people do when they have more disposable income? They spend it. Private consumption rises. This perfectly illustrates the full picture of our internal movement. By the time we hit point B, private consumption is actually much greater than it was back at point A. So our overall aggregate demand is growing rapidly as we move down the curve because we have this awesome dual engine driving it. Investments are up because of the lower interest rate, and private consumption is simultaneously up thanks to higher disposable income. They're working together to drive output way up. Up until now, we've only been talking about sliding up and down a stationary model. Let's pivot to Section 5, shifting the entire curve. External shocks. It is incredibly important to separate these two concepts, as it's a classic pitfall to mix them up. Moving along the curve is triggered purely by a change in the interest rate. The curve itself stays exactly where it is. But shifting the entire curve, literally moving the whole setup, is triggered by changes in those external factors we originally said were fixed, namely government spending or taxes. Which brings us to a really critical question. If we know that external factors move the curve, what exactly has to happen to cause the entire IS curve to shift outward to the right? A rightward shift, let's call it moving to IS1, means that at any given interest rate, the total output is now higher than it was before. According to our model, this happens under two specific conditions. First, an increase in government spending. Since G is a direct piece of our aggregate demand formula, pumping more fixed government money into the economy instantly shifts the whole curve to the right. The second condition? A decrease in taxes. Lowering taxes immediately boosts disposable income, which spikes consumption, and boom, that also shifts the entire curve to the right. So the crucial takeaway here is this golden rule. The IS curve essentially acts as a mirror, reflecting the economy's exact output at any given interest rate. We've seen how interest rates pull the internal levers of investment and consumption, and how government spending and taxes can grab the whole system and shift it externally. Understanding these mechanical relationships is absolutely key to unlocking macroeconomic theory. But here's a thought to leave you with. If the IS curve perfectly maps out the goods market, what do you think happens when we introduce the messy, complex money market into this exact same space? That intersection is where the real economic magic happens, and it's absolutely what you'll want to explore next. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning how the moving parts of our world fit together.